Welcome to Inviting Oneness, a podcast where we explore true personal stories from friends and members of Equation. Stories where the illusion of separateness gave way to the deeper truth of our shared humanity. Oneness isn't an idea, it's an experience. This episode is a portion of a presentation Dr. Muhammad Faruque gave for Faith Communities Go Green called Living the Interconnected Life, Contemplation, Ecology, and the Spirit of Oneness. Faith Communities Go Green, a collaboration between Green Umbrella and Equasion, believes that faith communities have a powerful voice to offer as the world confronts the climate crisis. In this presentation, Dr. Faruque explores ecological living as more than a set of sustainable practices. He says, rather, it's a way of being that arises from a deep sense of interconnection with the universe. Drawing on the Sufi contemplative tradition, he reflects on how inner transformation, through mindfulness, presence, and reverence, can cultivate a vision of wholeness and belonging. Here's Dr. Faruque.
So let's talk about interconnected life, ecological living, and the set of practices that can help us deal with the climate crisis at a more practical level. So ecological living provides some kind of new ethical thinking about our relationship with the future, new ways of thinking, acting, and creating across various domains like energy, art, ethics, and social movements. So it is based on an alternative notion of human flourishing. So what are some of these concrete practices? If it is a question of values, what are some of these alternative values that I'm proposing, you might ask? In this context, I'm drawing from the rich treasure trove of Sufi tradition, which is the mystical and spiritual tradition of Islam, more than 1,000 years old. And Sufism, like other spiritual and mystical traditions, provide us with a lot of concrete meditative and spiritual practices that allow us to see the world in a different way. So in order to kind of make things simple, I decided to talk about specific meditation practices, especially meditation practices that one can practice during each day. So each day is dedicated to a transformative theme, and I'm going to be talking about those themes now. And the goal is to have this notion of unity, not actually notion, but as concrete experience of unity with the greater whole. So the practices can be boiled down to these 6 categories: detachment, activity, harmony, beauty, love, and being. And day 7, I thought I can set aside for free meditation. All right, so let's talk about these specific meditation practices and how they can help us maybe rediscover something about the natural world and also rediscover something about ourselves, something which we have lost in the course of the last few hundred years. But let's kind of see where we are at this point. There's no doubt about the question of the ecological crisis. And there is a way to interpret ecological crisis as a crisis of values. And if it is a crisis of values, then it makes more sense to talk about it from a more humanistic perspective. And here I'm drawing from the Sufi tradition, which offers all of these different practices and also ideas about the relationship between the human being and the modern human world and so forth. So if we boil down some of these teachings to specific meditation practices, then we have 7 days in a week. Each day can be dedicated to a very specific theme. So here's how it works. Some of us might be familiar with names such as Rumi, who is a very famous mystic from the Sufi tradition. But in this day and age, when we're constantly bombarded with stuff from social media, I think terms like oneness and self-realization, meditation, these words and expressions become part and parcel of our life. However, it's one thing to sort of get to know about them on a more superficial level, and also maybe just from reading a book, and quite another to be able to sort of practice them in our day-to-day life. That's the biggest challenge. So I come from an academic world. When there are talks given, I have given talks at Stanford, Princeton, and I've studied some of these top institutions. The intelligent people talk about these issues. They make it look like it's all down to ideas, as if the role that something like transformation might play is quite irrelevant, as if the way we think about ourselves and the relationship between human beings and the modern human world is sort of irrelevant. It's sort of your personal spiritual belief. So that's the mistake. Our education system as a whole, if I may kind of make that kind of blanket statement, does not equip us to kind of take a more holistic look. And instead, it encourages us to take a more problem solution approach, which has its benefits. But in this case, where we need to be able to look at the situation as a whole, the problem solution approach or the analytic way of looking at things really does not help. So Sufism, which is based on a contemplative method, starts with contemplation. And contemplation, unlike analysis, unlike this sort of bit-by-bit analysis or from A to B, and B to C, those kind of logical thinking, is more based on intuition, or it's an intuitive approach. So meditation also have their specific methods, and they also have their specific contexts. We live in an age where we feel spirituality is deeply personal. I think that's not entirely true. There's definitely truth in it. It's ultimately, as one mystic puts it, it's a journey of the one unto the one. However, spirituality, especially at the beginning, is often not very effective if there's no kind of community to support it. Community and some kind of perspective that binds the individual with nature and society is absolutely essential for most people when it comes to these spiritual practices in real terms, because it's very easy to talk about meditation and various details. But I guess in this kind of setting, we're more interested to know the real life impact of these practices. We want to know how they can really make change and not just kind of sound edifying, which it has its own purposes. Let's begin with detachment. So detachment, at the very beginning of the spiritual life, one needs to realize that the ego is the force of impermanence, greed, and suffering. So if we just follow the ego, it will take us to places where we might experience the quote-unquote illusion of happiness, but oftentimes we'll be kind of moving in a circle. So this meditation focuses on detachment from the excess of the egoistic desires and so forth. But here is something very important that needs to be clarified as well. Detachment does not mean complete seclusion, complete separation from society. I was just saying how community is so very important. I mean, Buddhists have sanghas and Sufis have brotherhoods. And it's historically to this day, if you travel to Muslim countries or even in the US, it's not like there's one person practicing Sufism. It's done in a communal context, but at the same time, it is deeply personal. It is deeply up to the individual in a way. To sort of repel some kind of misconception, I need to emphasize that detachment does not mean sort of leaving the world as a whole, complete separation from, living the life of a hermit, to put it bluntly. That's not what it means in Sufism or even in most spirituality. Rather, it's an inward attitude, allows us to distinguish between real happiness that is associated with our real personality, our real self, and the kind of short-term impermanent happiness that comes and goes that is more associated with the ego. How about day two? So you might recall in the slides for day two, I had activity. So first of all, let's talk about the significance of this activity and why this is a powerful meditation theme. So much of modern life is based on work that we have reached a point where I think many people would agree that work has essentially replaced traditional understanding of your meaning and belonging in the world. In fact, work, productivity, climbing up the ladder of success, careerism, these are the kind of things that people want to, especially we as young people sometimes want to know more about, and kind of they drive our passion and so forth. And again, this is not a question about no work versus 100% work. This meditation is about the right orientation toward work. And we can see how meditation is supposed to guide our daily actions, our orientation to society, to the world, and also how we see the world through whatever ideas, if it is work. If some of us think that work is the defining feature of life and so forth, then there is, from a Sufi perspective, there's a problem. Because what if this kind of endless productivity ends up in a place where we have this, what some philosophers call the burnout feeling? We have used our energy in such a blind way that we feel like we almost have no energy left. And people are now talking about various mental health issues and so forth. So we better ask questions about why do we work, for whom, and to what end. And again, as you can see, these questions by nature, they're kind of meditative. And again, if we're looking for real transformation, we cannot simply wish it to happen in a matter of just a few days or let alone a few hours or so forth. It's got to be a lifelong process. But there has to be this question of orientation. And through my humble experience of traveling around the world and teaching courses in spirituality and immersing myself in the spiritual universe of Sufism and also other spiritual traditions, and also being a student of philosophy, I would say that we often confuse between theoretical aspects of things and its practical consequences or its practical dimension. It's one thing to kind of even learn about meditation, and it's quite another to practice them in our day-to-day, or being able to integrate them. When it comes to that question of integration, there are all of these everyday challenges, specific individual challenges. But if we're able to do so successfully, then there is that hope for transformation, which has immense consequences in terms of oneness. So yeah, day 1, detachment. Day 2, activity. Day 3 is based on harmony. So harmony is not simply a question of personal emotional balance or calm. So harmony is more than the individual. It's a harmony, I would say it's cosmic. If we pay attention to various processes in nature, try to understand various natural processes in the universe, or even try to pay attention to the various sounds, we see that there is harmony in nature. Of course, people might point out, how about a tsunami? How about these extreme weather events? But again, it happens through a pattern. If chaos rather than order and harmony won the order of the day, I think we would have a very different view of the universe. So if we understand that there is harmony in the universe, then the next question is, why is it that I'm not harmonious? I don't feel that harmony. This is where spirituality and Sufi practices can be of so much help. So there are these meditation practices and other practices self-cultivation, that can help us to discern, sort of like a musician, dissonance of the soul. Just like a musician is able to sort of distinguish between dissonance and kind of soothing sound, we should be able to hear the inner sound of the soul. And this is an art that one has to master. And it takes this inward orientation, which meditation by definition provides. So, all right, so we can see that this is already a lot. If we are thinking about some of the values of individualism and the notion of individuals being separate from one another and living on their own islands and thinking about their own personal preferences, this is already a huge step away from that kind of value concerning who we are, because harmony implies kind of interconnectedness, a harmonious relationship between different parts. Day 4, likewise, is devoted to beauty. So again, the commonplace understanding of beauty reduces it to kind of personal taste or personal values. Beauty in Sufism is, yes, there's definitely a personal take on it, but it's much more than the personal. It is something objective, and it even transcends culture. Think about a serene mountain. Think about the smile of an innocent child. Why is it that people across culture, language, races, ethnicities found these phenomena beautiful? Because there is beauty, and it's also closely tied to harmony. There is beauty in the universe. So the next question is, through meditation practices, how can we sort of integrate beauty within our soul, and what to do when we feel like our ego is kind of creating a barrier. So this meditation helps us to integrate the value of beauty. And then day 5 is about love. And again, we cannot talk about our transformation, oneness, especially oneness with the universe, oneness with the nature of reality, without talking about love. Because for Sufis, love is what brought the universe into being and what kind of cuts through the pulse and the arteries of the universe. It's the central drama of human existence. However, there are different kinds of love. There's familial love, there's romantic love, there's kind of more non-egoistic spiritual love. But all love has the ability, if they're kind of pursued properly, to transform our soul, because it's able to sort of shake the foundation of our ego, which is the kind of everyday experience of reality. We should reflect which love shaped our soul, what pain transformed us. And then day 6 finally is about being. So being is not simply existence. To be is not simply to live in an inauthentic way, as in everyday existence. Rather, it is to really ground ourselves at the heart of our being. And that normally does not happen because there's always some event that kind of creates turbulence on the surface of our soul. And our soul is often restless. So this meditation allows us to see that beneath this wave of, I'm using this metaphor, restlessness, there's the kind of sea of being, there's the kind of seabed, which is always calm. But the question is how to penetrate, how to really enter into the deepest core of ourselves. That is where this meditation is helpful. And of course, it's also very subtle. Finally, day 7 is no meditation, free meditation. It's about going with the flow, not thinking, giving oneself a rest and simply let everything be and sort of freely integrate all other teaching. So these 7 day cycles, if it's continued throughout the year and then year after year, then according to Sufism, this is what is able to provide transformation. So if the climate crisis comes down to a crisis of values, then we should rethink our conceptions of the self, rethink the relationship between the self and the climate and the modern human world. We should also be mindful of the obstacles of individualism, obstacles of endless economic growth, policies that we now have become part and parcel of our life, which is, of course, it's a complicated issue. On the one hand, we need to consume things, but on the other hand, overconsumption leads to all of this environmental degradation. So what is the right way to achieve this trade-off? So simply economic or policy level solutions or technical solutions will not do. That is what I'm talking about. Rather, if we're able to make lifestyle changes and control our overconsumption patterns, control our consumptions of things that really are not necessary, and then make changes both at the individual and the policy level, then of course there is some hope. But that does not mean it will simply solve. It will help us reorient toward a new future. So that's the part that you can connect when it comes to these Sufi practices and how they can help with climate crisis. But interesting enough, even if there was no climate crisis, would Sufis not practice this kind of meditation? The answer is, of course they would practice, because for them, that's a natural thing to do. That's the more authentic way of living, because these practices allow us to ultimately achieve inner harmony and also unity within ourselves. It allows us to kind of transcend the limitations of our ordinary egoistic existence that is at the root of separation, at the root of some of these really destructive notions, such as thinking of nature as a resource to be utilized, thinking of nature as something like a giant machine, and human beings also some sort of machine, as some scientists are saying, we're just biological machines. What is the basis of that? the deeper we enter into ourselves, the deeper we think about, contemplate about the nature of existence, and especially through self-cultivation and meditation practices, we come to experience non-separation with mountains, rivers, animals, everything else. They don't appear as if, they're kind of just mountain. They're experienced more as one's body and self. And this is very large. And from this, we can sort of connect this back to the climate crisis again. If we are able to somehow see, unlike the way our education tells us, that mountains, rivers, they're not separate. They're part of a greater whole. And we ourselves are part of a greater whole. And that's the essence of these meditation practices. Our perspective on the world, our perspective on our values regarding consumptions, economics, these are all bound to change. Because who would want to self-destroy? Who would want self-destruction, like part of your body being destroyed? If mountains and rivers are experienced as not separate, as parts of yourself, we would be so very concerned with the destruction of species, degradation of environment.
Thanks for joining us on Inviting Oneness, where we share real stories of connection that dissolve the illusion of separation and reveal our common humanity. Check the show notes for a link to the full presentation by Dr. Muhammad Faruque. If this episode moved you and you'd like to get involved, visit us at equasion.org to find out more about the Volunteer Summit on September 17th. Until next time, may we keep inviting oneness within ourselves and with one another.